It's never a good sign when I'm excited to bring in some new friends to a game I played in early access for a night of gaming after a 1.0 release, only to have it end early, but that's exactly what happened on Monday. Demonologist released their 1.0 patch a mere 5 days earlier. It's published by Clock Wizard Games, whose only other offering on their official Steam page was listed as a game called Haunt Chaser, and the reviews for that title are not very promising. Comparisons to Phasmophobia will obviously be common and expected. Both games follow similar formulas, with similar ghost names, similar equipment, and similar mechanics. So does Demonologist do anything to separate itself? Or is it just another Phasmo clone trying to cash in? The answer to these questions is not terribly clear-cut, but I'll do my best to help guide your decision if you're on the fence with this one. Probably the biggest standout for Demonologist is the game's overall look. While Phasmo has a few levels that have a bit of personality to them outside of Anywhere USA vibes, each map in Demonologist absolutely drips with personality. Each level has carefully crafted scares, haunts, and a creepy atmosphere completely unique to it, and while the game map might suggest it's all close together, you'd be forgiven if you thought you were taking a world tour. The Kurosawa house looks like it's straight out of Japan, the hospital has multiple signs in Russian, and Cyclone Street or the abandoned house exude haunted vibes that I wish Tanglewood or Willow Street would. I absolutely felt immersed every time I entered the Demonologist maps, especially the first few times that I played them. This is one category that, frankly, Phasmo just doesn't compete. Yes, Sunny Meadows has a lot of personality, but most of the other maps are decidedly less interesting to look at. Demonologist brings the aesthetics and the scares, and that absolutely went a long way into making me feel genuinely unsettled and engrossed in ways that Phasmophobia never did. If we're talking graphics alone, Phasmophobia is the first date that shows up in something comfortable and worn in, while Demonologist is showing up wearing something that's tailored perfectly and every strand of their hair is in near perfect place. The unique maps don't just stop at looks and haunts either. Each map has puzzles to be solved, and while some of them are bordering on a little maddening, if you really get irritated at them, it doesn't take much to search out the solution online if it really bothers you that much. The map design is also overall better, with a couple of gripes that could be arguably called more gameplay problems than map problems. For example, in Phasmophobia, on large maps like high school or prison, I always hate when the ghost is super far away. That long trek back to the truck to get equipment gets really tiresome. In Demonologist, however, the large maps for the most part are designed in a way where, while they do feel big, the amount of travel time back to your staging area is usually pretty negligible compared to their smaller maps. It's definitely not perfect, however, and I can definitely complain about having the tiny couch in Cyclone Street as the only loop option in a game with no hiding mechanic. The devs do have hiding on their roadmap, but it's not in the game and they're calling it a 1.0 release. I find this to be an odd choice, but I'll expand on that thought later. Progression in Demonologist is pretty decent. While there's no prestige system or tiered gear system like the Ascension update in Phasmophobia has, you can grind for cosmetics or safe houses with features that include but are not limited to a cat and a bar that will serve you beer if you ask for it. While the prices of everything will almost certainly induce a certain amount of sticker shock, I didn't find money too difficult to come by if I was willing to do a little grinding for it, and even if I had multiple deaths in an evening, I never really felt like I was going to go completely broke as long as I wasn't playing completely reckless. In Demonologist, you grind cash for cosmetics. In Phasmophobia, you grind for better gear, more akin to a traditional prestige system. Different approaches, but in my opinion, both systems work for their respective games just fine. Something else I also liked about Demonologist is that once you discover what the ghost is, you can actually attempt to do something about it. I remember finding it beyond weird that when I first started hearing about Phasmophobia, my friend was pitching the game to me saying things like, "You figure out what the ghost is." And I was like, "Okay, what's next?" And he was like, "That's it, you're done." I mean, if I call a plumber to my house, I don't expect him to tell me that there's water dripping from a pipe. I need him to fix the leak. Well, in Demonologist, you don't have to leave the ghost behind. You can actually take them out with a map-specific exorcism. I will not spoil these for you here because while some of them are a little bit more on the tame side, some of them are actually quite spectacular. And if you're thinking about jumping into Demonologist, then this is something I really don't want to spoil for you. So where does Demonologist start falling short then? Well, for starters, even on medium difficulty, sometimes evidences can take an eternity to show up. One of the matches we got into last night, for example, I was staggered to learn that by the mission's end, we were in it for an hour. And believe me when I tell you, we felt every long minute of that one when it was done. What makes this worse is the fact that Demonologist splits up the investigation into different phases, and you can't progress into the next phase without completing the phase prior. If you have a group in Phasmophobia that's dealing with an inactive ghost, there's other things that you can do, such as find the bone or take some photos and get a little bit of extra cash. In Demonologist, if you're waiting on evidence to show up, all the secondary objectives for Phase 2 are blocked until you lock in a guess. And by locked in, I really mean that you were locked into it and you can no longer change it, even if your teammates haven't made their guesses yet. If that sounds annoying, it's because it is. Equally as annoying is all four people standing in a ghost room waiting for something to happen, staring at each other for long stretches of time, which I found happened in the 1.0 release of Demonologist way more than I expected it to. If my memory hasn't completely failed me, it really seemed like this was happening way more often than when I played it a few months back in its early access period. The game absolutely has a pacing problem, and if the devs somehow watch this, I would really recommend looking into a way of blending the three phases together rather than have them hard locked. I think it would allow for some better game flow with shorter matches, and that would also help with the haunts and the scares retaining some of that fear. As far as the lack of evidence is concerned, by the way, it's worth mentioning that we did figure the ghost out a couple times based on what was written in the journal. And while yes, the journal is far more helpful in Demonologist than its Phasmophobia counterpart, there are still multiple ghosts that have completely empty data entries. And remember, this is a game that's claiming 1.0 release. Let's talk about haunt mechanics for a minute. In Demonologist, as I mentioned earlier, there's currently no hiding. It's on their roadmap, but it's not in the game now. I can't judge a game based on what they plan to do, only by what they give me. And so since they're saying, hey, our game is now out of early access, then this is what I'm going to judge. Since there's no hiding, anytime a ghost hunts, you have no choice but to loop. On most maps and most scenarios, this isn't too much of a problem, but there are times where this can get tricky or problematic. Take the hospital, for example. The only looping point is the large front entrance. This means you'll potentially have to kite the ghost a long way to the front of the building every time you want to evade it. The way Demonologist grace periods work, there's a possibility that it will start hunting before I even get back to its ghost room to continue to check for evidence or secondary objectives. We even had a case on Monday where I was essentially stuck in the back of the hospital because the ghost hunts were so frequent and the downtime so low that I couldn't physically even pass through the hallway that was the ghost room without letting the ghost take the crucifix. In Phasmophobia, the ghost hunts are spaced out enough to where you can still operate even in high stress conditions, and it feels satisfying to do so. That is a big part of why I keep putting more hours into Phasmophobia. In Demonologist, there are times where once the ghost gets angry, you're done. Also, while in Phasmophobia, there are multiple ghost sounds that add to the atmosphere of being hunted, the ghosts in Demonologist are completely silent. While I found the first few times this happened, it might have made the ghost a bit more scary, eventually that fear turned into something that could almost be comical to watch, as you just have this thing with sometimes goofy animations. It just stops being scary and starts being more of an annoyance. It's one thing when you're getting chased for the first time, but once you've looped the ghost a few times, it stops being scary pretty fast. And I feel like if it had any sort of audio attached to the hunting ghosts themselves, it might have helped them retain some of that fear. The long matches really don't serve the game as a whole, by the way. If we were only spending 10 to 30 minutes per match, there's a good chance that every time we started a round, there would be more chances for more variety in haunts or jump scares. But since we were getting stuck on maps for 30 plus minutes, we were starting to see a lot of the same things over and over, and the novelty and the newness definitely erodes much, much faster. If you think I'm trying to talk you out of the game at this point, let me present one of the biggest pluses for the game. $15 US is a remarkably low price of entry for just about any game in 2023. If I bring my wife to see a movie, I'm probably spending more than that on tickets alone for the average of what, a 2-hour experience? And also keep in mind that even when the newness of the game does wear off, if you have a friend that discovers and wants to try the game later on, Moments like the one I'm about to show you are well worth the price of entry for me.
Doesn't your basement look like this?
No.
Go left. Look in there.
Jesus Christ! God damn it! I jumped out of my chair. Fuck.
What's gonna happen?
Oh my god, it got me so bad. Fuck. I literally left my desk. I was halfway across the room.
So what's the verdict? While Demonologist lacks the pacing or hunt mechanics that's going to keep most people coming back night after night, the style and the scares of each individual map are certainly more than enough to justify the low price of entry. Not only was it fun the first time that I myself played it, but it's also been fun each time I brought a new friend into the game to try it. While I don't think I'll be playing it often, I do see this as a game that'll be worth dusting off if either another new person wants to try it, or if I just want to check out an occasional update. I didn't find anything in Demonologist that says for me this is going to be a Phasmophobia killer, but I do think that if you're the sort of person where the indie jank of Phasmo turned you off and was too much, Demonologist might be a better point of entry for you. Thank you so much for watching. See y'all soon.